You could step on the bathroom scale today and then, step on it again 6 months from now and see the exact same number looking back at you.
Right, the exact same number.
Yeah. Yet your clothes fit totally differently, your posture has completely changed, your resting energy is higher, and biologically, you're operating a vastly upgraded piece of machinery.
Which is such a wild concept for most people.
It really is. So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are taking the bathroom scale, tossing it out the window, and replacing that obsession with a look at the actual science of body recomposition. We've got a pretty dense stack of sources on the table today covering human metabolism, nutrient partitioning, and the cellular mechanics of reshaping the human body.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a critical shift in perspective. Because the traditional narrative around physical health has just been, well, overwhelmingly fixated on making a single number go down.
Just shrinking.
Exactly, just shrinking. But when we look at the clinical data on body recomposition, it tells a much more complex and, honestly, a much more empowering story about what our biology is actually doing when we change the demands we place on it.
Okay, let's unpack this right from the jump because we really have to separate two concepts that are almost always conflated, right? Weight loss and fat loss.
Yeah, they get grouped together constantly.
But they are entirely different biological events. I mean, the bathroom scale is basically a blind metric. It measures the total gravitational pull on your mass, but it can't tell the difference between a pound of fat, a pound of muscle, a pound of water, or, the density of your bone.
And the danger of relying on that blind number becomes glaringly obvious when we examine the metabolic fallout of traditional crash dieting.
Oh, for sure.
When someone severely restricts their calories just to force that scale weight down, the body enters a state of perceived starvation. It doesn't neatly select fat cells to burn while leaving everything else intact.
Right, just panics.
Right. It often breaks down its own muscle tissue to harvest energy. And from a longevity standpoint, losing muscle mass is just metabolically disastrous. The true goal of body recomposition isn't getting lighter. It's altering the ratio of lean mass to adipose tissue.
So it's about becoming more metabolically efficient, even if the total mass of the system stays the exact same.
Exactly.
But wait, so if muscle is this highly prized, metabolically expensive tissue, we run into this immediate biological paradox. Like, if I reduce my calories to lose fat, why wouldn't my body want to burn off that expensive muscle first to save on energy costs?
That's the logical assumption, yeah.
It seems like getting rid of the most demanding tissue would be the body's first defense mechanism against starvation. So how do we stop it from doing that?
Well, to answer that, we have to look at how the body manages its energy budget, specifically the basal metabolic rate, or BMR. The body is a highly dynamic system, constantly turning over cells.
Constantly rebuilding itself.
Exactly. And muscle tissue, like you noted, is biologically expensive. It requires a continuous supply of calories just to maintain its existence. Fat, on the other hand, is essentially a dormant storage vault of energy.
It just sits there waiting for an emergency.
Right. What's fascinating here is that when a moderate energy deficit is introduced, the body's default survival mechanism is indeed to shed the expensive muscle.
It wants to ditch the overhead.
Yeah, exactly. To prevent that, we have to introduce a specific, localized stress that fundamentally alters the body's energy partitioning priorities.
Okay, think of your body's metabolism like a car. Traditional starvation dieting is like trying to make the car lighter by ripping out the seats, tearing out the stereo, and eventually ripping out the engine itself.
You're lighter, but you're barely moving.
Right. The car weighs less, but it has terrible performance. Body recomposition is the process of upgrading that engine to a massive V8. You are building this metabolically expensive tissue so it burns more fuel, even when the car is just, idling in the driveway.
I love that analogy.
But the body won't keep that V8 engine if there isn't a really compelling biological reason to do so.
Which brings us to the signaling mechanism. The only way to convince a body in a caloric deficit to spare the V8 engine and even build upon it is by proving that the muscle is absolutely essential for immediate survival.
And how do we prove that?
We do that through mechanical tension, specifically strength training or resistance training. When a muscle is forced to work against a challenging external load, it creates microscopic disruptions, basically literal micro tears in the muscle fibers.
So we are intentionally causing localized trauma to the tissue.
Precisely, yeah. But it is a highly controlled trauma. The body is an adaptive machine. So during the recovery phase, it doesn't just repair those micro tears back to baseline.
It overcompensates.
Right. It triggers a cascade of hormonal responses to rebuild those specific fibers slightly thicker and denser. anticipating that, this level of physical stress will happen again. But for this biological upgrade to continue, the stimulus can't remain static.
It has to keep getting harder.
Exactly. This is where the principle of progressive overload becomes the central driver of the entire process.
Okay, I have to stop you there and push back on the feasibility of this for a normal person
Oh, yeah.
because progressive overload means continuously increasing the demand, right? Lifting heavier weights, doing more reps.
Right.
But realistically, a person can't just add 5 pounds to the bar every single week indefinitely. Or eventually they'd be lifting a commercial truck.
Obviously, yeah.
So if the body adapts so quickly to this stress, how do you prevent hitting a plateau after just a month of doing the same routine without essentially having to live in the gym?
It's a really valid concern. But progressive overload isn't just a linear march toward lifting a truck. The adaptation is about changing the parameters of the stress.
What do you mean by parameters?
Well, if you can't increase the weight, you can increase the time under tension by simply slowing the movement down.
Yeah.
You can decrease the rest intervals between your sets. You can improve your mechanical range of motion.
Oh, so just making the same weight feel harder.
Exactly. And the central nervous system plays a huge role here as well.
Yeah.
The sources point heavily to the value of compound exercises. Movements like squats, deadlifts, overhead presses.
The big lifts.
Right. These don't just stress a single muscle. They demand intense coordination from the central nervous system to fire multiple large muscle groups simultaneously.
And the research indicates you don't need this massive time commitment to trigger this neurological and muscular adaptation. Just 2 to 3 structured sessions a week seems to be the sweet spot.
It really is.
I like to think of it as downloading a software update patch. You don't need to rewrite your phone's entire operating system every single day. You just plug it in, install the patch a couple of times a week, and let the system run the new code.
The software patch analogy works perfectly
Yeah.
because the systemic benefits of that update extend far beyond just the muscle tissue. When you place heavy mechanical tension on the body, the bones are also forced to adapt.
Oh, wow. So the bones get stronger too.
Yes, osteoblasts are stimulated, which increases bone mineral density. The connective tissues, so your tendons and ligaments, they thicken and stiffen to support the heavier loads. You are fundamentally reinforcing the structural integrity of your entire skeletal system.
Which has to drastically reduce the risk of joint injuries in just daily life.
Exactly. It makes life physically easier.
Okay, so we have successfully sent the signal. We've created the micro tears. We've told the central nervous system that this V8 engine is essential for survival, and we've demanded an upgrade. But here is the next hurdle.
The raw materials.
Right. If we are maintaining that moderate calorie deficit to force the body to burn stored body fat for energy, where is it finding the actual physical material to rebuild those torn muscle fibers? You can't build a house out of thin air.
This is where we shift from the physical stimulus to biochemical raw materials. And it requires a total reframing of how we view nutrition.
Food as information, right?
Yes. Food isn't merely caloric fuel. It is biochemical information. Every time you eat, you're flooding your bloodstream with signals that dictate hormone production, enzymatic activity, and cellular repair. And the most critical piece of information for this specific process is dietary protein.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because if the strength training session is the architect's blueprint dictating what needs to be built and where, the protein is the literal pile of bricks.
That's a great way to visualize it.
I mean, without the bricks, the blueprint is totally useless. The construction materials never arrive at the site.
Biologically, those bricks are amino acids. When you consume protein, your digestive system breaks it down into individual amino acids, which are then circulated to the muscle tissue to drive muscle protein synthesis, or MPS.
Muscle protein synthesis, okay.
If the concentration of essential amino acids in the blood is too low, MPS cannot occur, and the muscle remains in a damaged catabolic state.
It stays broken down.
Right. This is why the sources emphasize not just total protein intake, but its distribution throughout the day.
Wait, let's look at that distribution aspect, because it really challenges a lot of standard dietary habits. Say I need 150 grams of protein a day. Why shouldn't I just eat a massive 150-gram steak at dinner and just be done with it?
Because muscle protein synthesis operates on a threshold system, and it has a hard cap. The body does not have a storage mechanism for excess protein in the same way it stores excess carbohydrates as glycogen or excess calories as adipose fat.
So it can't just save the protein for later.
Exactly. If you consume 150 grams of protein in a single sitting, your body will utilize roughly 30 to 50 grams to maximize the muscle protein synthesis response for that specific window of time.
And the rest of it.
The rest is either oxidized for immediate energy or excreted. By distributing your protein intake into 3 or 4 doses throughout the day, you're repeatedly triggering that synthesis response.
Ah, keeping the body in an anabolic state.
Right, an anabolic or muscle-building state for a much longer cumulative period.
And beyond just the cellular repair, protein solves one of the most glaring issues with trying to reduce body fat, which is the psychological and physical fatigue of constant hunger.
Oh, absolutely, the satiety factor. Protein is the most highly satiating macronutrient. It triggers the release of peptide YY and other satiety hormones in the gut that basically signal the brain that you're full.
It tells you to stop eating.
Right. This is what transforms a moderate calorie deficit from a miserable test of willpower into a sustainable lifestyle. But the sources are equally clear that carbohydrates and fats cannot be demonized here either.
Which people love to do. They love cutting out entire food groups.
They do, but it backfires. Carbohydrates are stored in the muscle as glycogen, which is the primary rapid-fire fuel source required to actually perform those intense compound exercises we talked about. If you deplete your glycogen by cutting out all carbs, the mechanical tension you can generate in the gym just plummets.
The signal gets weak.
The signal gets very weak. And dietary fats are the structural precursors to crucial hormones. Without adequate fat intake, testosterone and growth hormone levels crash, severely blunting the body's ability to recover.
So balance is non-negotiable.
Completely. The overarching consensus from the nutritional data is a stark warning against extreme rigidity. Any protocol that completely eliminates a macronutrient group is almost guaranteed to fail over a 5-year timeline. Sustainability is the true metric of success.
That makes perfect sense. So we have the training blueprint and we've delivered the amino acid bricks, but when does the actual assembly take place? Because if you are sweating on the gym floor, you aren't building muscle, you are actively tearing it down.
Right. The gym is a catabolic environment.
Yeah. The growth has to happen elsewhere.
The physical reconstruction of the tissue happens almost exclusively when the nervous system is in a parasympathetic restorative state. And the most profound version of that state is deep sleep.
When you're completely under.
Yes. During the slow wave phases of sleep, the pituitary gland releases pulses of human growth hormone. This hormone facilitates the transport of amino acids into the muscle cells and simultaneously signals the body to mobilize stored fat to cover the energy costs of that repair work.
Let's pause on that because the implications for our daily habits are massive. How often do you sacrifice sleep to hit an early morning workout thinking you're doing the right thing?
All the time. People wear it like a badge of honor.
Right. If you are waking up at 4 a.m. on 5 hours of sleep to go crush a high-intensity interval workout, you might feel incredibly disciplined. But biologically, you are sabotaging the exact process you're trying to trigger.
They're halting the progress.
Yeah, it's like you did all the work to gather the bricks and then you fired the construction crew right before they showed up to the site.
It is entirely counterproductive. And it introduces another biological variable that actively fights against body recomposition, which is cortisol.
The stress hormone.
Right. When sleep is restricted, or when psychological stress from daily life is unmanaged, the adrenal glands pump out cortisol. Now, in an acute scenario, say, sprinting away from a physical threat, cortisol is highly effective. It immediately breaks down muscle tissue into glucose for fast energy.
But chronic cortisol is a completely different story.
Chronic, constantly elevated cortisol is a catabolic disaster. The body perceives this continuous stress as a prolonged crisis, perhaps a famine. So it continues to break down expensive muscle tissue to keep blood sugar elevated while simultaneously downregulating your overall metabolic rate.
It slows the whole system down.
And worse, high cortisol levels actively direct the body to store any unused energy as visceral fat, specifically around the abdominal organs.
Because it's an emergency reserve.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Visceral fat has a dense concentration of cortisol receptors and serves as a highly accessible energy reserve for future emergencies.
So chronic stress literally biochemically reshapes your body to store belly fat and burn away the V8 engine.
It does.
That is terrifying. But it also explains why managing recovery is just as critical as the workout itself. And the sources bring up this fascinating concept of neat non-exercise activity thermogenesis as a way to aid recovery without spiking that cortisol.
Yeah, NEAT accounts for all the subconscious or low-intensity movements you do throughout the day that aren't formal exercise. Fidgeting, walking to the mailbox, taking the stairs, even standing at a desk.
It's general human movement.
Right. Because these movements are so low intensity, they do not trigger a cortisol response or cause muscle damage. Instead, they gently increase blood circulation, which flushes metabolic waste products out of the recovering muscles and delivers fresh nutrients.
It's like active recovery without the effort.
Exactly. High NEAT levels act as a massive, subtle engine for total daily energy expenditure, keeping metabolism elevated without taxing the central nervous system.
Okay, we've mapped out this incredibly intricate network of mechanical tension, amino acid availability, deep sleep, and hormonal regulation. But this inevitably raises a question about the timeline of human biology. Yeah, does this complex cellular machinery start to rust out as we age? We generally associate getting older with an unavoidable decline, slower metabolism, weaker joints, muscle loss. Is the ability to genuinely recomposition your body a biological privilege reserved for people in their 20s and 30s?
The clinical data on aging and muscle adaptation provides one of the most optimistic perspectives in human biology, actually.
Really?
Yeah. Sarcopenia, which is the age-related loss of muscle mass, is undeniably real. But modern research suggests that a significant percentage of what we accept as normal aging is actually a disease of disuse.
So it's not just the clock ticking?
No. The fundamental cellular pathways that drive muscle protein synthesis and fat oxidation remain completely viable and responsive throughout the human lifespan.
So it's a use it or lose it scenario. We stop sending the progressive overload signal, so the body happily divests itself of the expensive V8 engine.
Exactly.
But surely the hormonal landscape changes, right? I mean, a 55-year-old doesn't have the same testosterone or growth hormone profile as a 25-year-old.
That is true. As we enter our 40s, 50s, and beyond, we experience what is known as anabolic resistance. The body becomes slightly deaf to the signals of strength training and dietary protein.
So the signal isn't getting through as clearly.
Right. A 20-year-old might trigger muscle synthesis with 20 grams of protein, whereas a 60-year-old might need 35 grams to flip that exact same biological switch. The machinery still works perfectly. It just requires a louder signal.
That makes sense.
This makes resistance training and adequate protein intake vastly more important as we age, not less.
The stakes just get much higher. It moves away from purely aesthetic goals.
Exactly. For an older adult, muscle mass acts as a metabolic sink to absorb blood glucose, drastically lowering the risk of type 2 diabetes. It serves as the physical armor that maintains balance, ensures functional independence, and protects against catastrophic falls.
So the adaptation process doesn't stop.
No, the required dose of the stimulus just shifts.
So what does this all mean? What a profound realization. The aging process is not a one-way passive slide into frailty. It means someone can walk into a gym for the very first time in their 60s, start sending that mechanical signal, and watch their body biologically rebuild itself stronger.
They absolutely can.
They can regain mobility, dramatically shift their metabolic health, and completely change how they move through the world.
This raises an important question about how we view longevity, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It forces us to reconsider the fitness industry's obsession with the 30-day transformation.
The quick fixes.
Right. True physical longevity has nothing to do with rapid weight loss.
Right.
It is about constructing a resilient, sustainable foundation. Because the adaptations of body recomposition are built slowly on a cellular level rather than through crash diet starvation, they are remarkably durable.
They last.
They do. Consistency over a long timeline creates a highly adaptable, capable system, regardless of the decade of life you happen to be in.
Well, we have covered tremendous ground today. We started by permanently retiring the bathroom scale, recognizing that it is entirely blind to the actual composition of the tissues that make up our health. We explored how to fundamentally shift our metabolic baseline by forcing the body to hold on to its expensive V8 muscle engine through the mechanical tension of progressive overload.
And feeding that engine.
Yes, looking at the biochemical necessity of treating food as information, using distributed protein to supply the amino acids required for muscle protein synthesis. We uncovered the invisible work of recovery, realizing that chronic cortisol and restricted sleep will chemically override all our efforts in the gym.
You have to let the crew work.
Exactly. And most importantly, we learned that this incredibly adaptable biological machinery remains ready to respond at any stage of life, provided we give it the right inputs. This isn't just theoretical science. This is the operating manual for the vehicle you are navigating your life in.
Well said.
And if you are taking anything away from this deep dive, let it be the understanding that the goal here is not unyielding perfection. It's not about a flawless streak of workouts or rigid nutritional purity. It is about providing a steady, consistent signal to a dynamic system that is always capable of renewal.
That is the crucial takeaway. And as we conclude, consider the broader implications of what we've discussed regarding the flaw of merely measuring mass. If total body weight is such a remarkably poor proxy for metabolic health and actual physical capability, imagine how our entire approach to healthcare might evolve if the medical community stopped leaning on the body mass index, which, let's face it, is just another arbitrary ratio of weight and height.
It really is.
Imagine if instead routine checkups measured lean muscle mass and bone mineral density as the true vital signs of human longevity. So the next time you happen to look in the mirror, ask yourself a fundamental question about your own biology. Are you trying to shrink or are you trying to build?